Practical applications of anti-fragility in organizations, projects and programs. What a mouthful. That's the title that I was given by ICCPM and IRM. I'm going to just simplify it a little bit to understanding anti-fragility and then giving you some guidelines towards practical application. You might know from my previous work, I'm pitched myself as a thought leader, but I'm also interested in practical application. And so this presentation is more at the thought leadership end. We're talking more about a novel concept, a new idea, which you might have heard of. A lot of people have misunderstandings about what anti-fragility actually is. So I want to start by clarifying what the concept really means and how it relates to other similar ideas. Make sure that we're clear about what exactly it is, and then move quickly through that towards some ideas that we can apply practically, both at the whole organization level, but because of ICCPM's interest in projects and programs, to focus in on applying some of these ideas to projects and programs. But because this is thought leadership and some new ideas, then we're still pretty much at the kind of experimental stage. We don't have case studies yet. We don't have great examples. So I'm hoping that what I'll give you is some things that you can then take away and run with and develop and make them work on your own projects, programs and organizations. So I'm going to cover 4 topics. First of all, definitions, anti-for what. I'm going to use metaphors to help us understand different aspects of anti-fragility, which will end up with a hierarchical taxonomy of anti-fragility to understand how it works at different levels. And then, as I say, ending up where I want to get to, that the main point of this is to give you some suggestions for practical applications. So let's start with some fairly basic ideas. The world is uncertain. We know about VUCA. We know about questions raining down on us wherever we turn and blocking our passage. And the common response to this is either robustness, making sure that we're strong and able to fight off the challenge, or resilience to make sure that we can bounce back. And in terms of definitions, robustness might be defined as the ability to withstand or absorb strain while maintaining full performance. Strength is good, stronger is better. The problem is that sometimes the stress and the strain may be more than we can actually cope with. So what do you do if strength isn't enough? Resilience, the ability to return to acceptable levels after performance degradation, perhaps more popularly known as bounce back ability, just the ability to absorb what comes and then to bounce back to full performance. With the phrase, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, of course, unless it kills you. So we've got these other suggestions. Robustness is, it's fine. You know, I'm strong enough, everything's fine until it isn't. Or with resilience, everything will be fine, just wait and see, we have to bounce back. So those are the responses that most people try and adopt when we're faced with stress and strain and disruption, and uncertainty and challenge and change and all of those things. So if we look here on this graph, I thought I'd do without my glasses, but I can't do without my glasses. So it's old age. There we go. So here we've got some graphs that illustrate robustness on the left, where you're fine, everything's fine, and then the stress continues and you kind of wobble a bit and collapse. Or the middle little line, which is more around resilience, where you take a hit, but in time you recover, maybe even plus or minus a little bit. Maybe you might recover to slightly better than 100% or a little bit less, but it's basically a recovery line. So the question is there something in addition to robustness where we start at 100% performance, and if the stress continues or is too much for us, we end up failing and end up with no performance at all or something severely degraded. And then we have this resilience where we start at 100% performance and then we take a hit, but eventually we get back to where we were before. Theoretically, you might think that there could be a progression between these two, which might lead us somewhere else, which is more interesting, into an area of enhanced performance. Now that's supposed to be green on my screen. It doesn't seem to be green. But the background there, green being more positive, is there something which is a progression from robustness and resilience? And this is where anti-fragility fits in, where in theory it's an idea that says robustness, the end point after stress is we failed and we have compromised performance, maybe we have no performance at all or severely degraded. Resilience, we take a hit and we end up back where we started, plus or minus a little bit. Could we imagine a situation where the situation of stress results in something positive, something which is enhanced performance? And you'll see the scale actually goes above 100%. Is it possible in theory that there might be something which benefits from disruption and stress and chaos and crisis and uncertainty? And these ideas came originally from Taleb, who we're familiar with from his 2007 book, The Black Swan. He actually wrote another book in 2012. I've got a copy here. This is the paperback version, called Antifragility, Antifragile, Things That Gain from Disorder. And what he has here is a theoretical possibility of a progression from robustness and resilience, as we showed in the previous slide, something called antifragility. But in his book, although it's quite thick, I mean, it's an inch, a couple of hundred pages, 400 pages. I don't know if you know Taleb's style, but it's not, well, it's a unique style. I won't say very much more than that. But he doesn't actually, he's not big in definitions. And he just defines antifragility as the exact opposite of fragility, which doesn't really help us, does it? And there's absolutely no guidance on how you use this theoretical idea. And so for me as a thought leader, I was interested in it. I read the book when it came out. I kind of thought about it. And I thought, well, it sounds good. It would be nice to actually use this, though, in practice. I wonder how we might do that. And I'm not alone in that. Lots of other people started thinking about it. But before we go into application, we need to know what we're talking about. So here is my definition of antifragility. There are others, and you can find them in the literature, in Wikipedia, in Wiktionary and other places. But here's what I'd like to use: the ability to permanently improve and enhance performance in the presence of stress. So it's an effective response to risk and uncertainty, but also to disruption, crisis, change, challenge, and all those other things. And you'll see how it compares with the definitions of robustness, the ability to withstand or absorb strain whilst maintaining full performance unless you fail, and resilience, which is the bounce back ability, the ability to return to acceptable levels. With antifragility, we're permanently improving in the presence of stress and strain, which is rather different. So here's some pictures to perhaps illustrate that. I've got a couple of examples of stress, strain, challenge, change, disruption. Here's one, and the scale is on the right-hand side, where you have a single pulse of stress, which is quite high, and then it falls away again. Another situation might be where you get a lower level of stress, but it continues for a long period of time. With robustness, what you'll have is when you get that stress, if you cope with it, that's fine. If you don't cope with it, you fail. With resilience, what you get is that you're disrupted when the stress is present, and then you bounce back to 100% performance. What happens with antifragility, though? How is that supposed to work? Well, let's replay these, but with a scale on the left-hand side, which says performance is at 100% level. That's where we start. What happens in an anti-fragile situation when we get either a pulse of stress or a continued situation of prolonged stress? So let's just run this together. The black line at the top is the anti-fragile response to a single pulse of stress. And you'll see that with antifragility benefiting from stress, producing permanently increased performance in the presence of stress, what happens is that as the stress level rises, so performance rises, and things get better in the presence of stress. And when the stress disappears, we maintain that high level of performance. So the anti-fragile situation, the anti-fragile scenario, is to improve when stress is present and to keep that improvement. So stress is good for you. And the situation is similar if we have a sustained lower level of stress or strain or disruption or crisis or change. The performance continues to improve whilst the stress is present. And when the stress disappears, we keep that high level of performance. And this is what antifragility is, in theory. Antifragility is a situation where we say things only get better in the presence of stress and strain and disruption. And so we want to welcome that kind of uncertainty or disruption because it's going to be good for us. Well, that's the theory. It sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? How do we actually use that idea? And is it possible to build anti-fragility into our organizations and projects and programs? Well, people have been thinking about applying Taleb's ideas ever since 2012 when he published the book. And there have been some quite good applications in the area of personal development, in helping people deal with trauma, post-traumatic stress, helping people deal with crisis and major disruptions in their own well-being. And there have been some good applications helping people to thrive in the presence of trauma and difficulty, and more than just bouncing back, actually develop that kind of can-do attitude which helps them. There's also been some interesting work in material science, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, where we talk about how we can develop anti-fragile materials, still in the R&D phase really, but things that people are beginning to think about. How do we develop materials which benefit and get stronger in the presence of stress? In terms of organizations or projects and programs, I'm not sure we're actually there yet. We don't seem to have any good guidelines. There are one or two sort of moves towards getting anti-fragile organizations, but I'm not sure people have really thought this through, and it's a bit kind of hit and miss. So the idea is, how do we find a situation in organizations, projects and programs where the presence of stress makes us stronger, and not just during that stress time we kind of gird our loins and rise to the challenge, and then afterwards we kind of lapse back to where we were before. How do we make ourselves permanently stronger when stressed? So stress is good for us. And the difference between anti-fragile and some of these other types of responses is that we're looking for an innate internal response that's a characteristic of the organization or the project and program, so that the permanently stronger when stressed comes from within us. It's just how we are. It's not a set of choices. When stress comes, we choose to do this, we choose to implement improved, enhanced procedures, or we choose to develop some new way of organizing or communicating. It's not a chosen response, it's just who we are, we rise to the challenge and we get better. So how do we do that in organizations, projects and programs? I'm going to use the idea of metaphor to help us understand this. And I just put this picture up just because I like the picture. You might, if you're a gamer, you might recognize the metaphor video game. This is being released, I think it's the 11th of October. This is one of the leading video games. But I'm not going to talk about video games. I'm going to talk about three different types of metaphor: the human immune system, non-Newtonian fluids, and child development, and see if these things, which are illustrations of situations that are permanently stronger when stressed, see if they can give us some insights that we can use at the organizational level or at the level of projects and programs. So I'm going to have a block of metaphor. The point of talking about metaphors is not to understand the metaphor itself, it's to give us insights that we can apply in the area that we're interested in. So I'm not going to teach you about the human immune system in any great detail, or non-Newtonian fluids or child development. There is an academic paper that I've published last year, and I'll give you the reference to that at the end, where we go into these things in a bit more detail. The point of using metaphor is A is like B. It's not to learn about A, it's to give us insights into B. And so I've got 3 or 4 slides on each of these areas. The first is to describe the area of the metaphor and show how it's anti-fragile. And then I'm going to suggest how we might apply that in the organizational or project and program setting. Okay, so here we go. Let's start with the human immune system. The body is an amazing thing. Your body, my body, everybody's body. If we're invaded by a foreign body, which we call an antigen, the human immune system is set up with 2 different types of response. As I say, I'm not intending to teach you about these in particular, but we need to just cover a little bit of the basics. The first response, which is instant, as soon as you get an antigen in your system, it's called innate immunity, and within the first 3 or 4 hours, you get a non-specific response with a whole set of different cells attacking the antigens, the things that have come into your body. Phagocytosis, which is absorbing, eating up the antigen, using a whole range of different small molecules, histamines, enzymes, cytokines, and so on. And it doesn't last very long. It's an immediate response that as soon as you get something in that shouldn't be there, you start to hit it. And that's just the way that our immune system is set up. It's an instant response, but it doesn't last very long. But innate immunity triggers the second part of the human immune system, which is called adaptive immunity. And this takes a few days to develop, up to 2 weeks sometimes. It's specific to the particular type of antigen that we're being attacked by, and it's mediated by 2 types of cell in your system. They're called T cells and B cells. T cells destroy the infected cells directly, phagocytosis, and the B cells produce antibodies. And these things are specific to the particular attack. So we have 2 things going on if we get an antigen into our system. Instantly non-specific, we get an innate response which starts attacking the thing that's come for us, and then it triggers the adaptive response, which takes more time to develop and which is specific to that particular antigen which has come into the system. Now, the interesting thing about the adaptive immune system with T cells and B cells is that some T and B cells live for a very long time, and they remain in our system to give us what's called immunological memory. So that if the antigen comes again, then we're ready for it because we've got long-lived T cells and B cells which are right ready to go for them. And of course, this is the basis of vaccination. So the body learns. It doesn't learn through the instant innate response, that's just temporary. The innate response gives us instant protection, but it triggers this longer term response which lasts within the body. And you can see that this immune system is an antifragile response because it's only triggered in the presence of the stressor, in this case an antigen, but it gives us a permanent ability to respond immediately again in future. So it comes as a response to the stress and it stays. We have this immunological memory. Now, what does that do for us in terms of giving us insights into organizations? I'd like to suggest to you that people, individuals in our organizations are like these different cells in the immune system. There's a whole range of different types, and some of them are pictured here on the screen. Different types of cells are involved in the immune system which have complementary different roles, and they need to work together in order to respond to the attack of the antigen. But what we've got is 2 different types of antifragile response to uncertainty and crisis. The first is we want an innate response. We want people who are alert, agile, ready to go. As soon as they see something comes in, they want to be ready to hit it, whatever it is. And so we need empowered individuals for an innate antifragile response within our organization or our project or our program. And that's fine to give us instant protection. Something's changed, we need to do something different. But then we need a longer term response where other people follow behind with an adaptive antifragile response, innovating and experimenting to develop a targeted response specifically aiming at the particular type of attack or disruption or crisis or uncertainty that we're subject to. So the immune system has the 2 parts: instant innate immunity, which triggers longer term adaptive immunity. And I'd like to suggest, and we'll come to how we do this towards the end, that we need 2 parallel responses in the way that our individuals in our organizations, projects and programs respond to uncertainty or disruption. An innate instant response and an adaptive specific response. We'll talk about how we do that in a moment. And in terms of that immunological memory, we need organizational memory. We need to keep our good people, keep the experience. We need to spread the experience through organizational learning and adaptation. And we'll talk about how to do that in the last section of the presentation. So my first metaphor is the human immune system, where the presence of an antigen triggers an instant innate response, which then in turn triggers a longer term adaptive response, which remembers that attack and permanently develops a capability to deal with it. And so that antifragile response in the human immune system could have an equivalent in the way that our people respond when we're subject to uncertainty, disruption, crisis, or change. So that's my first metaphor. Keep that in mind. We'll come back to it later on. Secondly, what are non-Newtonian fluids? Well, Newton had a whole lot of laws. One of his laws is the law of viscosity, which is that the viscosity of a fluid or a material is constant at given temperature and pressure. And so that's his law. What we discovered in time is that some fluids don't obey Newton's law of viscosity. That if temperature and pressure stay constant, some fluids change when we stress them. And there are two types of change. There are fluids which become more liquid when they're stressed. The viscosity changes, it becomes higher. And we call that thixotropy. The classic example is the bottle of ketchup, which is a kind of a gel, but if you shake it, it becomes liquid and then you can squirt it out. Or toothpaste, similar. When it's a gel, when you put it on your toothbrush, when you scrub it up and down and you stress it, it becomes liquid and you can pass it around your mouth and spit it out. And there used to be paints as well that were gels, and when you dip the brush in, they turn into liquid and then you can brush them. So that's thixotropy, where the viscosity will change and become more liquid when you add stress or force. There's another type of non-Newtonian behavior, which is called rheopexy, where things become more solid when stressed. And this is a little bit more interesting and more rare. Custard is a typical example. And the custard, or a mixture of corn flour and water, can be quite liquid, but if you stress it, it can become more solid. The general term for this rheopectic liquid, custard is a specific example, but these are called ooblecs. It's a real word. I want to just show you an example of a custard experiment. I'm hoping this little video is going to work. But it's a standard experiment. You can find it online. I'll give you the YouTube reference, where you can take a vat of custard, which is liquid. You can pick it up with a spoon, but actually the custard will bear your weight if you stand on it. Do you think that's possible? Let's have a little look. This is from a series called Brainiac, a swimming pool full of custard, and John Tickle, his name is, actually tried walking on it, and he can walk on it. It's incredible. The pressure of his weight turns the liquid custard into a solid. And further on in this video, he stands still. When he doesn't stress it, it returns to liquid and he just sinks. But you can walk on custard. Amazing. So here's the link if you wanted to follow it up. The interesting thing with most rheopectic materials like custard or other ooblecs is that when you take the pressure away, they revert to liquid again. So it's only a temporary effect to be non-Newtonian, where you get more solid when you're stressed. I hope you're still with me. Most rheopectic materials revert, but not all. And this is where there's some really interesting research in materials science at the moment. And I've just put some examples on here. Athletes' footwear, safety helmets, military combat body armor, where if something hits them, they instantly become hard. They're soft and flexible initially, but if you fall off the scaffolding and you hit your head on the floor, or a cycle helmet is another example, it instantly becomes more rigid and gives you more protection. But without the stress, it's light and it's flexible. And obviously, combat armor for soldiers is similar. You want something which is flexible and movable when they're doing normal maneuvers. But if they were to be hit by a missile or a bullet or an arrow or something, then that instantly becomes harder and gives them the protection. So it's quite an interesting area, actually. What does it have to do with antifragility? Well, clearly this rheopexy, that type of non-Newtonian behavior, where you become less liquid, more solid when you're stressed or hit with pressure, what's happening here is that the pressure is forcing the molecules in the material to adopt new structures, which weren't possible without the stress. So the stress forces the material, the atoms and molecules in the material, to develop new structures which are stronger, with new links and new bonds formed with new strength properties. And the rheopexy that we're looking for in some of these new materials gives you permanent improved strength. So it meets the diagram of antifragility. When the stress comes, you're wearing your body armor and you're hit with a bullet, your bulletproof jacket instantly becomes rigid and strong and gives you protection, and it stays like that. And that's what we're looking for. So non-Newtonian fluids which are rheopectic, I know it's an unusual word, but you'll get used to it. Rheopexy is an example of antifragility in these non-Newtonian fluids and non-Newtonian materials more generally. What does that have to do with organizations, projects and programs? How does stress make us stronger in this area? What's happening with the non-Newtonian material is that the stress is forcing new interactions between the molecules that weren't possible previously. Is it possible that we could have something in our organizations where a stressful, disruptive, chaotic, or highly uncertain situation allows us to do things that we couldn't do before? It increases synergy and innovation and creates stronger structures with improved performance. I think that's possible. I think we could see it in two areas. One is people, with new team structures and group structures that weren't possible without the disruption that's come. It allows people to adapt their roles and collaborate in different ways. And also in our processes, things that become possible because of the disruption. Zoom and this method of communication that we're using is a typical example. Because of the disruption and chaos of the lockdown and the COVID pandemic, we were forced to do something different. This way has become a permanent enhancement to our communication performance. And what it requires to work is empowered people and flexible processes. And we'll come back to that in a little while. So hopefully you can see that this idea of a rheopectic non-Newtonian material, where stress and force and pressure makes it stronger and it stays that way, is something that might have an equivalent in an organization where stress and pressure and uncertainty makes it possible for us to work together in new ways at a kind of structural level. Okay, third metaphor. Something that we've all gone through, child development. And if you're a parent, well, good luck. Bringing up kids is always a challenge, and it doesn't change. My kids are in their 40s now. I can't believe that either. But there are still challenges and changes. But with little ones, with the whole sort of child development area, babies and children just have a built-in desire to go see, to try, to explore, and they demonstrate fearless curiosity. And our job as adults, both parents and teachers and anybody with kind of responsibility, is to balance giving them some freedom, letting them go, with keeping them safe. We want them to explore and to be curious and to try new things, but we don't want them to hurt themselves. And so we have to balance safety with freedom. And of course, if you get the balance wrong, it's not good for your children. Too much safety, you end up with what we call cotton wool kids, who are afraid, who won't sort of venture out beyond what they know, and tend to avoid risk under all circumstances. And they hide behind, behind their adults. They don't go out of their comfort zone, and it inhibits their development. Too much freedom, you end up with the wild child who has no constraints, who has no fear, who ends up taking too much risk and probably crashes and burns and breaks bones and has all sorts of problems. So we have to get the balance right. How do you get the balance right when you're bringing your children up to encourage them to explore, but to keep them safe? And the goal is controlled risk-taking opportunities. Yeah, you can climb that tree. I'm going to just stand underneath, or maybe we'll put a mattress underneath. Yeah, you can go and stay overnight with your friend, but take a phone, check in with me. I just want to know what you're doing and when you're coming home. Those sorts of things, controlled opportunities for risk-taking. And so that ability to handle risk, to stay safe whilst exploring and expressing, emerges naturally during healthy child development. It's a challenge. We don't always get it right, but it's an example of antifragility because as children are exposed to uncertainty or to risk or to dangerous situations and experience them, they develop the skills to deal with them, not just now, but in the future. So as that stress rises and they climb the tree, which is a little bit too high, or they go out with a bunch of friends and go to a club that isn't quite as safe as they thought it was, then what we want is for them to develop that kind of internal strength, which then they maintain, they keep, and they learn from for the future, so that in the future they can take the right risks safely. What does this have to do with organizations? What we're looking for here is some kind of emergent property which arises from experience and exposure. And here we're talking about, remember, whole organizations or projects and programs, emergent risk intelligence or risk maturity, if you like, improving our capability and competence as a result of being exposed to and taking risks in that organizational context. So this is something that maybe we're familiar with. So what we've got is three metaphors: the human immune system, non-Newtonian fluids, and child development. And from them, we've derived four different types of antifragility. The immune system has an innate and an adaptive element, the immediate response, which is non-specific, which then triggers an adaptive longer-term response, which is specific to the antigen. And we've seen how these might be applied in the area of individuals. We've also got a type of rheopectic antifragility where stress creates new structures. And this is something which could be applied at the group level in terms of people and also in terms of our business and project processes. And then in terms of child development, what that is, it's an example of emergent antifragility at the whole person level or at the whole organization level, at the entity level, where we might be talking about an entity meaning an organization or a project or a program. So we've got four different types of antifragility arising from these three different metaphors. I'd like to suggest to you that we could organize these into a hierarchical taxonomy based on the people in our organization. At the individual level, we want to have individuals who are innately anti-fragile and also have the ability to, some of our individuals, to demonstrate adaptive antifragility, which is more targeted. Based on those sort of people in our organizations, projects and programs, then we can start thinking about rheopectic antifragility at the structural level in the way that we organize our people and operate in our processes. And once we've got those structures in place, we can develop an emergent antifragility at the whole entity level, which allows us to take appropriate risks as a whole organization. And these levels throughout this hierarchy represent increasing maturity of organizational antifragility. Start at the bottom with the people, structure them up in anti-fragile ways, and then allow that to emerge with a whole entity, a whole organization approach. So there's the metaphors. How are we doing for time? Not too bad. What I like to do now is to get into the practical application suggestions, and just to give you some ideas in how we might actually apply some of these things in practice. So this needs to be intentional. It's something you need to think about. It needs a structured approach across your whole entity, bearing in mind that when we say entity, we could mean a whole organization. It could be a whole company or a corporation, or it could be a division, or it could be a segment of an organization, or it could be a project or a program. And this would be particularly relevant for large and complex projects of the type that ICCPM specialize in, which are mini organizations, as you know. So what I'd like to suggest is that we should work through the anti-fragility hierarchy from the bottom up, starting with the individuals, learning how to structure them together in anti-fragile ways so that an emergent anti-fragility can arise within our organization. So let's start with developing anti-fragile individuals. And you'll remember that this comes from the immune system, which has two types of individual or two types of cellular antifragility, innate and adaptive. So what does innate antifragility mean for individuals? These are the kinds of people that we have working in our organizations or our projects and programs. We want some of them to have the kind of personality which just gives them that instant gut reaction. The innate anti-fragility is instant and non-specific. These are our kind of first responders. The people who have the instinct when something goes wrong, there's high uncertainty or there's a crisis or stress, they don't run away, they run towards. And their attitude is protect and serve. Now, there are certain types of people who have these characteristics. Some time ago, probably about 20 years ago, I developed a competence framework with my colleague Ruth Murray-Webster, which we called PEAKS. Not specifically about risk, it's more generic, but it says that competence arises from 5 characteristics or 5 attributes: personal characteristics, who we are; experience, what we've done; attitudes, how we think; knowledge, what we know; and skills, how we apply it. And so we've got a set of innate characteristics, the P, E, A, and K, which we apply with skill in order to generate competence. And that's the PEAKS model. And within that, there are certain characteristics and attributes which lead to innate antifragility. We haven't really got time to unpack these in detail, but cognitive readiness, I've put that first because that's really important. That's an attitude which welcomes uncertainty. When uncertainty or stress or crisis arises, it's the ability to cope with that stress in a very positive way, to take partial solutions and apply them and adapt them as you go, with some of these other things: tolerance for ambiguity, a reflexive, thoughtful approach, being values driven, so you've got solid foundations, can-do attitude, and so on. Brave, curious. These characteristics can be measured, can be targeted. You can recruit people who are like that or identify them within your existing workforce. These people are innately anti-fragile. It's who they are. They're the sort of people that they're not fazed at all by uncertainty. In fact, it brings the best out of them. And we need those first responders in our organizations to give us an instant response as soon as something arises. But you'll remember in the immune system that innate antifragility triggers adaptive antifragility, which is more specific and which is more longer lasting. So what we're looking for, as well as those first responders in our organizations who welcome that challenge and will run straight towards it and instantly work out what to do, we want other people to be triggered by them. We want people who are proactive Me Too followers who say, I see they're going, I need to come in behind them and support. I need to come in and work out what they're doing and make it specific to this particular challenge. People who know how to experiment and innovate and adapt. People who are empowered to take something generic and apply it more specifically within agreed boundaries, of course. And this is again a kind of person that we need to encourage and identify and recruit if necessary, to train and to resource and to make sure that they're ready to go. So if something comes up in our organization, the innate first responders go and do the emergency response, but others come in behind them and make it more permanent. And then we need that organizational memory, which embeds the change, retaining the staff who have learned how to deal with the challenge and spreading the competence through the organization, through things like mentoring and job shadowing, skills transfer, training, and so on, building it into our organization. So at the individual level, we've got 2 types of antifragility we're looking for: innate antifragile individuals who are first responders, and adaptively antifragile individuals who will take that first response and make it more specific and targeted, and then build that into our organization. With our next metaphor, we were looking at non-Newtonian fluids or non-Newtonian materials, where stress makes it possible to have new linkages which weren't possible before, giving us permanent strengthening. And this comes from the synergies which weren't possible before. What we're looking for is new working relationships at the people level, role adaptation, new group structures, new team structures that we couldn't do before, as well as changed business operational and project processes, doing things differently. And this requires flexibility, removing barriers, taking an anti-silo approach, as well as having a learning organization where we embed our new structures and improve our processes and make sure we capture that and learn for the future. Some types of non-Newtonian materials that are rheopectic revert when the stress goes. The custard, for example, it's solid when you step on it. When you stand still, it reverts to liquid and you sink. What we're looking for is that permanent rheopectic antifragility where the new structures stick. And so we learn how to do something when the situation arises, and then that's built into our organization and becomes our new permanent, stronger structure, both in terms of people and processes. So breaking down the silos, having good communication, having flexibility, having communication, all of those things really important. And then the last of the metaphors, which was the child development, we're looking for antifragile entities at the whole person level or the whole organization level or the whole program or project level. We're looking for an emergent capability to deal with all these different situations that arise through maturing our risk management capability and competence. And this is risk maturity developed by exposure to risk and good experience in managing it. Some things here that perhaps we're quite familiar with in our particular discipline. So we need to understand our capacity for risk. Then in each situation, we need to know what is our risk appetite and use that to express that by setting measurable risk thresholds. We need to understand the risk exposure that we've got, compare it with our risk thresholds and manage it to remain within our risk capacity and within our risk threshold. So we're not taking too much risk. We're taking the right amount of risk to achieve our goals. And then we take the right risks appropriately in order to maximize our opportunity and minimize our threats and achieve our goals. Standard risk management approach. And what we want in terms of the emergent antifragility is to make sure that when we're stressed, we know how to take risks safely, that we take the right risks in our organization or our project. And that makes us stronger to do it again better in future. So our risk culture and our risk maturity emerges as a result of exposure and experience. And that's the anti-fragile response. So what we've got here then is the 4 different types of anti-fragility which arise from our 3 metaphors, and then trying to turn that into specific actions in our organizations at the individual level, finding and empowering those first responders. Who is there who's got the personality and the characteristics and the sort of the gut reaction type to run towards uncertainty, disruption and change and protect and serve? Where are our followers who will come behind them, build into that and make something more targeted and more specific and then embed it in the way that we're working? So we want proactive followership as well as empowered first responders at the individual level. In terms of structures, we need to be ready and willing to foster new working relationships in our groups and teams and to promote flexible process development in response to uncertainty so that we permanently improve the way that our people and processes operate in the presence of uncertainty. And then eventually across the whole organization, whether that's for the whole corporation or subsections of it or projects and programs, to develop the ability to take risk intentionally and safely, which is an emergent characteristic. So there's a lot of material there. I hope you found some of that interesting. I think it's clear that in the world that we live in of uncertainty, the VUCA world, robustness and resilience is important. We do want to be strong. We want to fight off as much uncertainty and disruption as we can. We do want to be resilient, to bounce back again, so that if we're stressed and we suffer a deformation or a loss of performance, we can bounce back. But it's not enough. There is something more than just being strong or just being able to bounce back. And that is to say, bring it on. When stress comes, it's good for me. There's something in me, in my project, in my program, in my organization, which makes me permanently stronger when stressed. So it's not just like I can cope and I'll be okay eventually. It's like it brings something out and offers additional benefits in terms of improved performance. That's what anti-fragility is supposed to do. And I think there are some simple practical steps which are exposed through these metaphors, through the immune system, through non-Newtonian materials, and through child development, which enable us to understand how we might apply some of those anti-fragile ideas at the individual level, innate and adaptive, at the structural level with people and processes through that kind of rheopectic forcing new structures, and at the whole organizational or project and program level through an emergent capability to take risks, take the right risks safely. That's what antifragility is all about. I think there are some clear practical steps that we can take to develop anti-fragile individuals, anti-fragile structures, and anti-fragile organizations. And I'd like to suggest it's worth having a go. I mentioned that there was a paper that I wrote. It's quite a long paper published in Continuity and Resilience Review last year, 2023. There's a reference here. We're going to make these slides available to people who have attended or registered. So this reference, you don't have to frantically try and write it down now. But if you remember Beyond Resilience in Continuity and Resilience Review, it's easy to find online, or you can contact me and I'll provide the paper for you. And there's a lot more detail in there. So I hope you found that interesting. I'm going to hand back to Colin, who's going to handle our Q&A time. I have got my contact details here. Again, these are available online. If you want to follow up with this with any questions or any specific application issues that you have, I'd be very happy to talk to you about that.